Good evening to you. Week number 6, Women in Crime, lecturecast, week 6. A pleasure being with you this evening. Thank you for letting me into your virtual world. Thank you to Captioning Services for everything that you do for us, as we certainly couldn't do it without you. Tonight I'm going to be talking about two particular different topics, but I think you'll appreciate both topics as they're part of our discussion for this evening's chat. The first topic we're going to talk about is shame, and the second topic we're going to talk about is shakedowns in prison and in jail. I have read quite a bit from what's already been posted in our classroom chat about my question that I posed to all of you about your own religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, social codes, etc. And I asked you to visit this whole notion of shame. And certainly many of you have come up with the same results, that shame is really a very important part of how it is that you behave. I'll give you some examples of things that I've seen on the street, as well as things that I have seen in jail and prison that have to do with shame. Let's see, where shall we even begin? For years, when I worked with the women at the county jail in Henrietta, here in Rochester, New York, very often I would go in once a week and sometimes twice a week, depending on the case and what it is that I was offering. At one time I offered the Whispers program, which was a peer-run support group for women who were victims of child sexual abuse. And I did that for many years. Another program that I ran here in Henrietta was the Poetry Workshop program, which was a very important piece in women's recovery issues and the ability to speak about what it is that had happened to them, similar to what we saw in many films like the film Monster, where women felt that they couldn't verbally discuss what had happened to them, so they wrote it as a dialogue through journaling and poetry. So depending again on the program, that decided the frequency in which I went in. And needless to say, I would go in very often, and I found something very interesting. And this is not a research issue, it's just something I'm telling you socially that I found interesting. And I have no data, and I have nothing empirical, but I'm speaking to you with certitude that this is how I found things, okay? The really young inmates, usually 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, what we would call traditional college age, which you could relate to, very often I would find out by week 3, week 4 of their incarceration in jail, I would say, did you get your first emergency visit yet? And they would say no. And then usually I knew what that meant. I knew that that meant that they didn't call anybody from their family. So depending on how I got the answer no, if it was a firm no, I usually read that as a cue not to discuss it any further, but sometimes I would get a tearful no, and I would see that the person was amenable to discussing it. So of course my next question would be, have you even called your family and told them that you were incarcerated? And then usually the answer matched the first answer, and the answer was no. And I would say, why haven't you called anybody? Aren't they going to worry about you? And I would hear something to the effect of, I've called so many times before that I can't possibly call with this again. It'll kill my mother, it'll kill my father, it'll kill my grandmother. I just can't bring myself to do it. And very often I would say to the women in jail here in Monroe County, well, don't you think it's killing your family members that they're wondering where you are all night? And most of the time the answer I get would be, yeah, it's probably eating them up, but they probably know I'm in jail. Interestingly, as technology had bubbled right along, there's something called the Inmate Lookup, which is a New York State service that the Department of Corrections has initiated, and you can tell usually if somebody's in custody or not. Also, here in Monroe County, I can't speak for every county, but in Monroe County, if you suspect, let's say in my case, if I suspected one of my children is in jail, I could call either downtown, which is Plymouth Avenue, or I could call Henrietta, and give the name of the person, whether it's a child, a husband, a neighbor, whatever. They don't ask because once you're incarcerated and once you're really on paper with the city, the county, or the state, it's public information. It's not confidential. And what I could do if I was in that situation is I could call the jail, give the birth date, and then they could tell me when the person became in custody. So it works sort of both ways. The family members who have some sense that their loved one who has disappointed them maybe before, shamed them before, whatever, they can always take the initiative to call jail. I've known mothers, fathers, caregivers that have also said to me on the flip side that they didn't even want to call because they didn't want to hear the deputy say, yes, your child's in jail or your sister, whatever, because it was too painful having that confirmation. But back to the gals in jail, I would say, don't you think you should call your family members so they don't think that you're laying dead somewhere or homeless or being beaten? And very often I would hear something so sad. These inmates that were really somebody's child would say to me something to the effect of, gee, I just can't bring myself to call because my mother has diabetes, my mother has cancer, my father had a heart attack already, and I just can't call them with another failure. So what had happened was is that the women would start signing releases with their phone number to their parent. Now, I have to be very careful when I tell you this because I don't want us to misunderstand one another. It's illegal to carry messages in most states through county jail and or prison, federal, state incarceration, from a civilian, which that would be me, to another family member on the outside. It's actually illegal to carry messages back and forth. But what had happened was is that I wouldn't carry messages. In fact, I wouldn't even answer when the parent would, let's say, on the phone would say to me, how's my daughter doing? I wouldn't even say fine, not fine, nothing. By law, the construct that I used for many years would be called a notification phone call. I'll give you for instance. Let's say on jail day, Monday, I met Susie Smith. And let's say Susie Smith was a client or a new client because I would pick new clients up in jail. And Susie Smith might say to me that they hadn't had their emergency visit. An emergency visit is a visit that you get one. And usually that's reserved for your family and or your children or your parents that can come in within the first week of incarceration because there's going to be personal business that you're going to have to straighten out if you have a rental property, if you have medicine you have to take, if you have a dog. It's just even the state realizes and the counties realize that you have emergency circumstances even when you come into jail. So let's say if I met Susie Smith on Monday and she told me that she didn't make the call and she's been sitting there for 2 weeks, I would have her sign a statement that I had typed up that would say a call for notification. And we would agree that I wouldn't even tell the parents or whomever it was that I was calling, a boyfriend, whoever Susie Smith asked me to call, and relay on their behalf that they were in custody. I couldn't even answer if the person said, is my daughter Susie Smith doing well? Did she eat? What was she arrested for? Did she sneeze? What color is her hair? In other words, the answer was no, 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 no. And the purpose of the phone call, I would say, is just to alert you that this person in your life has asked me to call you to let them know that they're currently incarcerated. And I literally hang up the phone. And I felt for a long time, I truly felt this way, that I was doing everybody a service because it's a horrible thing when you're a parent, and I'm a parent, 5 children. It's a horrible thing when you're a parent or you care about somebody and they just fall off the face of the earth, especially if they have a history of having issues, whether it's drug addiction, alcohol, stealing, whatever. Not to know where your child or your loved one is. Put yourself in the opposite position. How would you feel if you had a mother or a father that has a history of these kinds of behaviors and you're wondering, where are they? How come I keep calling, calling, calling? There's nothing there on the other side of the phone. You would want to know. So for many years I would make these phone calls, and I get very interesting reactions on the phone. Sometimes I would hear the person, whether it's a mother, father, boyfriend, whatever, child. I had to have to call for women my age, call their children, tell them they were incarcerated. And I would hear the people on the other side of the phone start to break down and cry. And it was a horrible feeling in a way because I had to extinguish the phone call anyway because I couldn't tell them anything more anyhow. So it's a horrible thing to have to hang up on somebody, especially when you're a helping person, when they're crying. And then sometimes I would be greeted, pardon my English, with, why the fuck are you calling me? Who the fuck do you think you are? Because the anger has to go somewhere. Some of these families and their children have been called so many times over and over again, and they were promised by my client slash this new inmate that they would never do whatever it is again, but they've done it. And instead I would take this verbal battering because they had to tell somebody off to get it out, and I'd hang up the phone. And then I would have the desperate, usually mothers, that would beg me to tell them how their daughter was or what her condition was. And I just couldn't do it because you can't pass the messages back and forth, and I'd have to hang up on this desperation, which saddened me to no end. And I remember I had one call in my history that I made to a grandmother, and I remember this distinctly. And I called to tell her the notification call that her daughter was just taken down to county jail, and that this is a notification phone call, and that she's at county jail. And as I was getting off the phone, because I heard nothing anyway, as I was getting off the phone, the grandmother, I'd come to learn later, the grandmother. So it was the mother of the person in jail. But the person in jail also had a child. And I remember that the grandmother said, I need you to tell my daughter in jail that her child has died. And of course you can't pass messages back and forth. So there was nothing I could do. And then the following week I went back to jail, and you have to put yourself in my position just for even a minute, because you know full well I wanted to tell that inmate that her child had deceased, had died, but I couldn't because you can't pass messages back and forth. And I remember I had gotten to jail, and I saw this particular inmate, and I guess the look on my face, I guess must have told it all. And the inmate said to me, did you make your notification phone call for me? And I said yes. And I had known this person from the street for many years, so she knew something about my expression and the way that I looked. And she said to me, did my mother say anything about my child? And I couldn't pass the message back and forth, but I guess as I started to well up, because it was very apparent to me that this inmate knew that her child was not in the best of health. And I guess, nonverbal communication tells people a lot of things, and the inmate started to realize that, the child had passed away. So that was probably something that really sticks out in my career that I don't like to talk about very often, but these things do come up, and you have to find some way to deal with all of it. I'm not saying that I have found a way to deal with all of it. I'm saying you have to find a way. Another lecture I wanted to offer you this evening is this idea about these raids and frisks that I would see often when I worked in corrections, not really in the county jail as much, because people, when they come to county jail, they're staying such a minimum period of time that they don't have a lot of time to amass a lot of items. But like in the larger facilities like Albion and Bedford, which is both women, female facilities. Interestingly, this is sort of weird, at Bedford Correctional and Albion Correctional Facility, which is the only two maximum medium security facilities here in New York State, if you are sentenced there, remember again, you're not sentenced for the crime, you're sentenced for the amount of time that you need to do. So even if you're sentenced for 365 days or more, you're going to go to a facility, a state facility. And very often, even if I was in that situation, if I was sentenced for 364 days, I would beg to be sentenced for 366 days, because the extra 2 days you get better food, and you get to pick your bedding, and you get more amenities when you go to state prison or federal prison. Anyway, and I remember that the women always enjoyed, I know this sounds crazy, the women enjoyed going to prison, even if it was for a short time, or meaning a little bit over a year, because you could pick your comforter set. There was like 7 or 8 designs you could buy from Dollar General, which was an approved prison store, believe it or not. And they would get to pick their comforter set, and they would get to have more things that they could wear, different colored shirts, versus going to county jail where you all wear really the same outfit unless you're a trustee. A trustee is somebody who's a low risk inmate that's trusted, the word trustee, that's trusted with some extra duties, and given a little bit more freedom, like the ability to work outside, the ability to work in horticulture, planting, and to get some of these extra amenities, because to sit locked up all day with 90 other women in a ward can just make you crazy. And you can only play so many cards, you know? Anyway, when I worked in prison, and I thought especially at Albion with the women, these shakes, these shakedowns that the prison staff, the guards would arrange, usually given by a sergeant or a lieutenant, they would go in and raid the women's things. And I saw this with the men too, you know, this kind of shakedown hostility. And what would happen is that usually with the men really never really had too much emotion about the shakedowns, other than they really just didn't want to get caught with a weapon or a shank, you know, because that adds more time onto your prison sentence. But the thing that I thought that was really very interesting and very demeaning, and really very sad, there's 2 ways this story is going to go before we say goodnight to one another, but I wanted to offer this to you, something to think about. I remember there was this guard at Albion Correctional Facility. She was really a pig. Everything about her was just disgusting. And she really shouldn't have been in that line of work. She was probably somebody who could pass the personality exam, etc. And I remember what great pleasure she would take in these shakedowns, and she would literally just step on the photographs of women's children that were sent to them, and just the look on her face of sheer indulgence, seeing that she ruined somebody's child's picture, to me was just so evil that not enough bad things could happen to her. And yet, I knew other guards and deputies, etc., at Albion, that when they did the shakedowns, you would think that they were picking up, you know, eggs in very fragile shells, no matter what the item was, and caring for it with the greatest respect and putting it aside. And they sometimes would even say to an inmate when they were doing the shakedowns and raids, here's the picture of your children, but I did find a shank or a weapon, homemade weapon, in your possession. So we're going to take you now into custody, into, you know, isolation. And they would even say, some of these deputies, there weren't many of them, but the few that there were, they would say, do you want a few moments with the picture of your child? Because I'm going to take that and confiscate it as well, but would you like to have a few minutes to maybe emotionally say goodbye in this pictorial? And then when you come out of isolation, etc., you can rejoin your things. So here it's so interesting that in the same facility, with the same inmates and the same circumstance, the shakedown, the raid, I would see different ways that people that were, quote, in charge would deal with these circumstances, and it really was a profound difference. In the male facilities, which it's just sort of interesting, it, there was never this hostility. I never really saw tremendous amounts of hostility in the facilities against the men, but for some reason I saw a tremendous amount of hostilities during raids against women. And usually the persons who were the most hostile, this is just my impression, so take it however you want, were the female guards. Usually it was the male guards that were much kinder during these raids than the women. So I guess I can't even understand that myself to make sense of it for you. So I wanted to leave you with those 2 topics this evening, as well as my several experiences hands-on with how I saw how things um, would shake out, no pun intended, in shakedowns. Um, Other than that, we're doing super duper with the chats. On Thursday, I'll load up the question of the week for you. And I'd like to continue to enjoy. A few of you owe me your literature review / midterms. I look forward to getting them from you, but let's try and be a little timely. I wish you well this week and try and relax a little as it's now coming to the end of the quarter. And I know many of you are graduating, so start enjoying your last few weeks of your college life. And I wish you a good night always, and thank you for letting me come into your virtual world. Good night to you.